At the beginning of Dear New York, there's an 8,000 word prologue. It engages with the diversity of New York City through a ride on the subway. And the subway was such a theme that I started thinking, well, maybe I'll do something with the MTA. And I started out thinking very small, maybe I'll hang some portraits and stories in a subway station. I found out that it was possible in 2 weeks in October to remove 100% of the advertising from the building and completely transform it into a public art installation featuring humans and their stories, just so that New York could be reflected back to itself. And therefore, there is not a single motive underneath that building other than to make something beautiful.
From World Within Studios and PRX, you're listening to the How to Change the World podcast. I'm your host, Rostam Zafari. I couldn't think of a better first episode than one of my best friends, Brandon Stanton. He's the creator of Humans of New York and a remarkable photojournalist and writer. This is part one of a two-part conversation. In the first part, we're going to focus on his launch of his public art exhibit, Dear New York. He's taking over Grand Central Station with this wild 2-week celebration of New York City reflected in its people and their stories and their photographs. This podcast is being released on October 9th. His installation is October 6th to the 20th. In part two, we're going to look at its past. We're going to look at how he got started, the discipline, the approach to his craft, building one of the most beautiful art platforms in the modern age. And I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Brandon, for those who haven't seen your work, tell us about it. What is Humans of New York? How did it start? How does it develop?
So Humans of New York, I've been doing it for 15 years. It's my project. Essentially what it is, I stop random people on the streets of New York City, but also all around the world. In a short amount of time, I try to create this bubble of rapport on the street where the person feels comfortable enough to not only allow me to take their photograph, but also interview them about their lives. Often I will spend 30 or 45 minutes with somebody talking about their struggles, their fears, their hopes, their dreams. And for each person, I try to then write up an expression of their worldview or their experience that's faithful and reflective of who they are. And I've done this probably 10,000 times over the last 15 years, not only in New York City, but also all around the world.
And how has the format itself evolved over those 10,000 different photographs and interviews?
Well, it's mainly, when it first started, I was just taking photos of people. It originally started as I wanted to create a photographic census of New York City. I was going to stop 10,000 people on the streets, and I was going to take their photos and plot their photos on a map. So they were very short encounters at first, and then gradually the conversations just got much deeper and much deeper. And the art form became much less about the photography, much more about the interviewing in a very short amount of time. One, how can I take an inherently uncomfortable situation, which is two strangers meeting on the street, and bring it to a rapport and an energy level where that person feels comfortable not only talking with me, but sharing things with me that they might not have shared with anyone else. And so that has really been the trajectory over the past 15 years. It's just deeper levels of engagement, and I think much, much more meaningful stories that have come out of it. Some of the stories have gotten much, much longer. I've written 8,000 word stories that I've worked months on. I wrote a story on your grandfather that was 20,000 words that I spent, 8 months on. So the storytelling has gotten much deeper, but the conceit of it is still the same. It's very real, honest stories of random, I don't like the word ordinary, but random individuals.
I want to get to my grandpa's story you did, but before that, I want to talk to you about how you get strangers to open up that way. I think one of the most incredible aspects of Humans of New York is getting someone to share sometimes the darkest moment or moments of their life in a matter of minutes. What is it about the way you are asking questions or listening? Or is there like an inherent belief that you think deep down people are looking to share and express those things? Like, how is that you've been able to crack that code, not just with one or two people, but 10,000 people in very different circumstances, but they all opened up to you? How?
Well, there's some, tactics to it, and there's, strategy, but there's a craft to it. There's ways of asking questions and correct follow-up questions to ask. And then also when I'm interviewing somebody, I've written the stories now so many times that as they're telling me things, my mind will throw up things that I need in order to put them in order for it to cohere and to have it unify and be a single expression. So there's all kinds of those calculations going on in the back of my mind. But I would say, much more important than those things are just the energy that is on the street. Like I said, the energy of two strangers interacting, whether it's on the streets of New York City or it's across the world in some place like Pakistan or Thailand or, any of the other places that I photographed. It's initially a very stilted, kind of awkward, mistrustful almost energy where everybody's trying to figure out each other's motives. And there's some self-protection that comes. And so I think my main, I don't even say it as a job because I'm not even really thinking of it as a job, is, my main role as the interviewer is to bring that energy down to another plane, which is an energy of presence where there's not all of these calculations going on in the back of the mind. Can I trust this person? How am I sounding? How am I looking? Am I silly? Things like that. And just anchor the person in a moment of presence where they are engaging with the conversation much more like they would be engaging with a conversation with a friend as opposed to a random stranger interviewing them on the streets. And really, that is all about, these are, big words that get used a lot of times, but it's really about absolute presence. It's about bringing yourself to a place where you're focusing so intently on the other person that you're fully there. And all of your follow-up questions are motivated by what that person is saying. Like really, I normally only go in with about one or two questions planned. What is your greatest struggle? What's the biggest obstacle that you've overcome in life? How has your life turned out differently than you expected to? Then after that, it's just very intense listening. And so every interview is different and it's all very much informed and led by the person's life and the person's experience. And I think when somebody is sitting across from you that is that intensely listening to what you are saying, I think there is, I do not know the neurochemistry of it. I do not know the mechanics of it. But something gets unlocked where you become very much a participant in the process, and it almost, that isn't even the right word because the process kind of melts away, and you're just there with another person who's trying to figure out your life, and you're a partner with that person in figuring out what they went through. What did it mean to you? How did it feel? All of these elements that sometimes we don't have time to deeply reflect on in relation to the events and the momentous occasions of our lives. When an interview is really good, I'm sitting with a person and we're pulling these out in real time. And that's where the real magic comes out, is when you reach a place in the interview that is so deep, the person hasn't thought about it themselves before. And so you're coming to these conclusions in real time. And that's when the most beautiful and novel observations come out. And really that's when I know I have something special, which I always get to, almost always, is if the person, I always get there if the person is comfortable with the process, that we've reached a point where through this person's unique experience, they have expressed to me something about the world that I have never heard despite having talked to 10,000 other people. And that is the expression that I craft, and that's the expression that I share with the world. So again, that's sort of the process if I was to put it into words. But the real beauty of it is that the process melts away when you're really deep and you're really into it. It's two people intensely sharing this moment together. And that's where the real organic, beautiful stuff comes out.
There's the epic Persian poem, the Shahnameh Book of Kings, that you know very well, and I'm trying to read with my grandfather every single day. And we got to a verse this week where it talked about all the wisdom and knowledge of the world exists, and it's divided inside every single person. And I feel like Humans of New York is celebrating that. And as you pull it out of people, you mentioned 3 questions as examples, and 2 of those were about hardship and struggle. Why is that the entry point to the conversation?
Right. Well, I really like what you said, and I think about that all the time. That each person has some, like, no matter how humble that person may seem to you, no matter how limited their experiences, maybe this is somebody that never had the money to travel. But what I found coheres with the quote that you said, that every person has some piece of truth that you do not have. To answer your question, what I found is it normally lies in the same area as their struggle. Because when you can find a person's struggle, like the main struggle that they're going through in life, and then these are so varied. For some people, it's physical illness. For some people, it's dealing with pain. For some people, it's addiction. For some people, it's addiction of their children. If you find the thing that somebody has thought about the most, you'll find these pearls of wisdom that they have come to originally and organically through chewing their own food that does not seem grafted on from somebody else's ideology, that does not seem to have been plucked from a quote book or some Instagram reel. This is something deeply earned and wise that came through lived experience. And everybody has these things inside of them. And usually, not always, usually it has come from the thing that they've been forced to confront and forced to overcome and forced to reach inside of themselves, find the resources they needed and the evolution that they needed to overcome this thing in life. And that's what they have to teach and offer the world.
I want to go to the kind of the big project that you're working on. First of all, can you tell me what is going on? What are the dates? What's it based around? Like, give me the high level so we can go into it more.
So for 2 weeks in October, this Grand Central Station will be taken over and completely transformed into a gallery of New Yorkers and their stories. All the walls of the subway station, 150 digital screens, main concourse, Vanderbilt Hall, everything will be turned over in one way or the other to depicting the stories and portraits of ordinary people in New York City.
This seems like a huge jump. What triggered the desire, the impulse to do such a public work, especially since so much of your work has been, solo. It's been like hours behind the screen or behind the desk writing. This is a very experiential piece. It's very public. Where did this impulse come from?
So the foundation story of it is that I just finished working for 3 years on my book, Dear New York. And, as with so many things that I've done, it didn't start with this grand idea that I went out and executed. It was the result of lots of iterations and tinkering. And it all just began with my thought of, at the beginning of Dear New York, there's an 8,000 word prologue. And the prologue deals very centrally and engages with the diversity of New York City through a ride on the subway. The subway was such a theme that I started thinking, well, maybe I'll do something with the MTA. And I started out thinking very small, maybe I'll hang some portraits and stories in a subway station. And so I started making phone calls and I started pulling on this thread and pulling on this thread and pulling on this thread. The idea kept evolving until it became, and I found out that it was possible in 2 weeks in October to remove 100% of the advertising from the building and completely transform it into just a public art installation featuring humans and their stories, just so that New York could be reflected back to itself. And over the past 15 years, the portfolio of Humans of New York is so deep. It's been thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of miles walked all over the city. And I have 10,000 portraits and 10,000 stories. And I really thought, I'm always as an artist, like looking, what is the one thing that I can do that nobody else can do? And I thought, this collection is so broad and it's such a wide spectrum of the city that I really believe I can recreate the city underneath a single roof in a single place. And what better place than Grand Central Station, which is really where the entire city comes together. It's the most democratic 24/7 open place in New York City. And so months of negotiations later, I ended up taking, so like the funny part of it is that this all started out with a finished book, and how am I going to promote this book, to sell this book? And hilariously now, um, I've I've spent more money than the book will ever possibly make. I mean, the book is guaranteed. The book is guaranteed to not be a financially profitable concern because of how much money that I've spent on what was originally meant to be something to promote it. And then Grand Central became to me, I won't say became bigger than the book itself. They were both called Dear New York. That's important. Both the book and the installation are called Dear New York. And to me, it's really the same piece of art. They're the same thing. The book was made out of stories of people on the streets of New York City. Money was given to me for the book. I took all of that money and I used it to create another piece of art in Grand Central that may perhaps help bring attention and promote the book. And then anything extra that gets made from the book beyond what is required to create what's in Grand Central will be given to charities in New York City. And so to me, even the money's part of the art. It's all circular, it's all self-contained, and it's all part of a single story. And that's what Dear New York is to me.
This to me seems like a magnum opus in a sense where it's like, you're at a place where, you openly talk about how social media has changed, right? So the footing for Humans in New York, there's always a question of what happens next. Like, you're not in the most secure spot with the greatest following, and yet you're taking perhaps the greatest risk of your career. What compels someone who already has success, who already has 4 #1 New York Times bestsellers, who already has hundreds of millions of people reading his stories, to say, you know what, I'm going all in on this?
Ultimately, and this is where it all goes back to, my original goal when I came to New York City was to make just enough money to where I could afford a place to live and photograph all day long. That was the end goal. And that has been so centering to me. And because ultimately my art was never for the money. If I had money, it was to make the art. And so that was always my North Star, and that was always my guidance. Even when the followers started getting layered in on top of that, even when the likes and engagements, the 90 million ways that social media will give you to analyze and measure and try to optimize for the way that people engage with your work. I mean, so many people, if not everybody, almost everybody, starts out these days with these numbers in their heads as their gauge of success. And I was just so fortunate that I always had it very deeply rooted that I didn't want to be a content creator. I didn't want to be a businessman. I wanted to be an artist. And what did that mean? That meant every day I was going to wake up and I was going to work to try to make the best art possible. Just every day I wanted my art for 15 years. Every day I wanted my art to be a little bit better than it was yesterday. And, the ego, the part that, kind of was a blow to my ego, but in the most beautiful way, was that I learned that my art was better. The less my thoughts were there, the less my face was there, the less of me that was there, the better my work was. And so, that started a 15-year journey of just completely removing myself from the work to the point where most people, maybe half and half, come up to me and they'll say, "Hey, do you work for Humans of New York? How'd you get a job there?" It's like, I would say that more than half of people think that Humans of New York is some sort of organization, because that's how hidden and that's how behind it I've been for 15 years. And this book, I signed this book contract at a point where it was very high tide for me, and I was compensated very, very well for it. When I started talking with the MTA and I started into these negotiations, I had a vision of what was possible. A lot of people came together and, they made contributions that made this possible. The MTA through 20% of all advertising is owned by the MTA. It belongs to them for public service announcements. They gave me those, like those aren't even for sale. They gave me those slots so that it could be a fully immersive experience. So they came to the table. David Korenz, who is the stage designer and production designer of Hamilton, Dear Evan Hansen, 37 different Broadway plays. He was the creative director of Immersive Van Gogh, designed 2 out of the last 10 Academy Award stages. He came on board for a rate that allowed me to be able to work with him. Pentagram, in my opinion, and I will go to the grave saying this now, the best design consultancy in the world, in the form of one of their partners, Andrea Trabuco Campos. Him and his team took on design completely pro bono. And so by me spending all of my money, by me giving everything that was given to me for Dear New York, and combined with all of these people coming together and making these in-kind contributions, with all of this together, it started to become possible that we could do something that had never been done before, which was to create this completely unbranded, immersive piece of art in Grand Central. And that was so beautiful because unless you're paying for something yourself, there's going to be other motives involved other than let's make something beautiful and let's make something amazing and meaningful and impactful. And by stretching as far as I possibly could, I was able to do it with my own resources combined with all of this in-kind help from other people. And therefore, there is not a single motive underneath that building other than to make something beautiful. And so that's the last few months under massive amounts of uncertainty, massive amounts of stress, massive amounts of fear that I'm not going to get to the finish line. And it's gonna less fear than there was a few months ago that I'm going to fall on my face in the biggest stage in the world. So we are working under massive amount of deadlines. So it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be big and chaotic and beautiful and messy. And
It's going to be New York.
there's the punchline, just like the city itself. That's, I think, the best that we could hope for. And that's what it's going to be.
It's one of the most beautiful things in the world to witness true belief in something good, and I feel like I have those same night sweats in terms of trying to put all the chips in for World Within and being like, hey, this is I think I don't know how this works, but spiritually it seems like there's some things that if you want your dream, you have to be willing to trade almost everything. There's you can't do a halfway bet for something as big as the work you're doing, and that resonates a lot to me. And also I want to also talk about all the proceeds going to charities or impact causes. There's a percentage of that going to local New York artists as well. Tell me about that, and then tell me about there's so many I would say mini events within this larger wrapper, right? I think that there might be a wedding happening. There's all sorts of incredible things. It is a multiverse happening there. Tell me about it.
Yeah, well, Grand Central is so sprawling and so massive that naturally anything that's going to be completely immersive in Grand Central is going to have a lot of different facets, as this does. The subway, both levels of the subway are being taken over. All of the walls, there's going to be a lot more vinyl than has ever been allowed down there. That's being completely handled and designed by Pentagram. And it's going to be featuring, again, just the photos and stories of New Yorkers from the Humans of New York collection. Then in the main concourse, there are going to be 60-foot projections on the 8 columns that are encircling the main terminal. Then the 150 digital screens that are spread out throughout the terminal, those are going to be featuring video portraits and scenic shots that were collected over a period of 2 or 3 years by me and a cinematographer named Michael Cromit. Then in Vanderbilt Hall, which is the main event space in Grand Central, we have it for 13 days, not 14 days, because on one day, it's the only thing in Grand Central that's not going to be Dear New York for these 2 weeks. There was a wedding. There was already a wedding scheduled when I got to the table, which I loved, because I thought it was so fitting. There's going to be a wedding in Grand Central right in the middle of our exhibit, and we've touched base with the bride and the groom, and we're going to roll that in as well. And in Vanderbilt Hall for the 13 days that there is not a wedding, there's going to be 2 open calls. We had an open call for photographers photographing their own communities, and 10 of these photographers will be chosen. They'll each be given a $10,000 grant, and they will each be displayed they'll have their own wall inside of Vanderbilt Hall. Around that, there is going to be another wall ringing the outside of the hall. That's going to be another open call for New Yorkers under the age of 18 to photograph somebody who's made a difference in their community that they would like to honor. And about 300 of those are going to be selected, and those photos are going to hang on the outside wall in a beautiful frame presented just as the professional photographers are being presented. And then at the end, we're going to take those frames off the wall and mail them back to the kids with 2 $50 gift cards to independent bookstores in New York, one for them and one for the person that they're honoring. So that I'm excited about this because in that one little room, it's like going to be housed in one physical space. But the real art and I think the real beauty of that room is happening out in the community and these connections that are between these young people and the people that they're honoring. And it just happens to pass through Vanderbilt Hall before returning back to them in the form of the framed photos. So that's a beautiful aspect of it that I'm excited about.
I was talking to my partner Dylan, who's the director of our TV show How to Change the World, and he was working through an episode. And he was talking to me yesterday. We're hitting some on one episode some challenges, and I shared with him the advice you gave me. You said, Rustam, like most artists will stop at a certain point, and they think it's finished. And what separates the great art from the really, really good art is that extra 10% you go above and beyond after everyone else would call it finished. And I feel like you do that not only in your writing, which is what you were talking to me about, but also in your interviews and also in your this project. Like when you ask a question, I've seen you, I got an answer that was pretty good, but you're like, no, something tells me there's something more to be said or something more to be written. I also want to ask about the book a little more because you spent a lot of time on it, and in typical Brandon fashion, you are largely absent for a book that's an autobiography in the sense of you have this 8,000 word prologue, which is a lot about the city. And then so much of the photographs and stories are other people's stories. Like even your book is other people's stories, which I think says a lot about you. There's a poem by, I think, Mark Strand. He has this line that says, absence is a presence too. And I think of that as your presence. Tell me about what inspired, you've written so many people's stories. What was the impetus to say, now it's time to put to paper Humans of New York story?
Well, it's a story, if you want to say Humans of New York story, it's Humans of New York began as my attempt to kind of capture this city. And so those 8,000 words is the story of my attempt to capture this city, which culminated in the book Dear New York, and then now the sister exhibition. And it's autobiographical in that very sliver of a way, in that it's the first time I've written in the first person. But I quickly disappear from the story, as you said. It becomes very much a meditation on the people of this city and how the people of this city are what gives it its soul and what gives it its spirit, and that is put together, hopefully, that is put forth, hopefully, in as lyrical and poetic and as meaningful of a way as I attempted to put it forth in this prologue. And then the next 500 and whatever pages demonstrate that through nothing but the stories and the photos themselves. So, it's autobiographical only in the way that I use the word I in the prologue for the first time. But other than I think anything that was appropriately autobiographical about Humans of New York would be probably nothing but the photos and stories of other people, because that's the story.
You've written lots of stories, But you've never experienced your own stories quite like this, on display in a public way. In what way do you think that medium is going to change your own relationship to it?
When you envision something that's this large and requires this many people to come together in this many disparate elements, there is a period which is very unnerving where you have to carry that vision alone because nobody else can quite see it in a way that is constantly going to make you feel crazy, delusional, and diminished because you think it's something that can be so big and so important and worth putting into all these resources to. And other people are not going to be able to grasp that in a way where you're just going to have to be the crazy guy for a while. And then gradually, the pieces start to come into fruition that only you could see in these images and these visions that you had in your head. And they start to become real. And not only that, but you bring on these other collaborators who are more talented than you in certain areas in certain ways. And things start to become real in ways that you could not even visualize or conceive. And suddenly, this thing that you were carrying that was nothing but mist to everybody else, but was very real to you, starts to become real to other people in a way that they can grasp onto it. And then they start to see what's coming. And so we're kind of at a period now where I'm only just starting to allow myself to, you know what? This is going to be pretty dang cool.
If you allow yourself to truly hope, you don't know what the impact will be. What would you hope?
I had to go into a quiet place and say, you know what? First of all, just putting people and their stories everywhere is enough. That's inherently beautiful. It's just like the message is the medium. You know what I mean? It's like that is enough. And then I think it's a statement about people and the power of people and the inherent dignity and the inherent beauty with all our shortcomings and body odors and jealousies and envies and trauma and with all of that mixed in. There's a dignity and a beauty about people that just by portraying them, it's enough. There is beauty there. And, I think all of the other elements that have been added, the Vanderbilt Hall, they all fit into that. It's just like, what is the open call for kids? It's people honoring people and hanging up pictures of people. The element with the professional photographers are people photographing other people and hanging up their pictures of people. And so, all through it, the one thing that unifies everything, like there's so many, Grand Central's so cavernous. There's so many hallways. And these things have haunted me. I thought I'd had 100% of it. And then I'd discover another hallway and I'd have to pick up the phone again and say, hey, what's this? How do I get this? And so, it's such a sprawling place and it's so hard to draw a circle around. And it's so hard to unify it and so hard to make it coherent. But the one thing that ties it all together is the people and their stories and their pictures. And, if the last 15 years have shown me anything, it's that there's power in just that.
I look back on, you've done series from prison reform to cancer to covering genocides to countries that the U.S. is at war with and going deep in telling this shared humanity. Like, how have you straddled the line of having impact in your art versus the art being about impact? Because you've always been very clear, hey, the art comes first, but there seems to be a really common line, a common thread through all the work that it's actually moving us forward, even if it's just in our understanding of other people.
Well, I think where I'd gotten to, in my mind is that there's something inherently impactful about revealing the lived experience of a person in a vivid enough way that someone else can imagine for a moment that had they lived their life and gone through their same experience, that they might be a lot like this person that they don't identify with a lot. There's something about that process that is inherently empathy inducing and inherently lowers the temperature of conflicts. I think in the last several years, I started raising a lot of money with it. I started doing much more real world, tangible uh, initiatives with the work. And right now I'm just finishing up a series on Gaza and Palestine that I'm doing with Doctors Without Borders, where I've been, just going through the motions, going through the exact same process. And I think that's what's so powerful about the work, is that I don't do it any differently, whether I'm interviewing somebody in a war zone or whether I'm interviewing somebody, on the streets of Chelsea. It's the same questions, the same process. But when that process is applied to certain populations and certain groups that have a lot of need or have a lot of discrimination against them, there's something more transcendent about it. And I think the impact does reach deeper.
You mentioned the series that you've been working on with Doctors Without Borders on Gaza. And I mean, reading those stories, some of the most horrific stories that I've ever read. I mean, I remember one of the recent ones I read was a physician who said he decided to stay to serve his people. And because of that, he has now 2 kids who are disabled. His wife is extremely ill. They're all like basically on the verge of death. And now he's like, was this worth it? Like, was I being selfish by staying here? And all these like just stories like it. You're, a month and a half, 2 months from perhaps the biggest project you've ever undertaken in terms of magnitude and scale, and it's putting your life's work on display. What compelled you with that this close to that launch date to do this series? Because I imagine this also has an emotional toll, and is just talk me through the experience emotionally of how the series on Gaza has been different from some of the other series, even if the work looks the same.
Well, I posted for the first time about Gaza in a full-throated way a few months ago now. Even that, way too late. And in response to that, I got, there were 40,000 comments. There was thousands of emails. There were text messages to my personal cell phone. There was a lot of very genuine concern from a lot of people, and very honest and heartfelt feelings. And I think I need to specify what that was. I interviewed a Hasidic man, who was on his way to a protest and wrapped in a Palestinian flag. And it was random. I did not set up a meeting with him, but he came across my path, and Palestine had really been on my mind. And he made a very strong statement about Judaism not having anything to do with nationalism, and being opposed to the actions of Israel has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And it's grossly misrepresentative to make that claim to people who are standing up for the rights of Palestinians. And I shared that post. And it turned out that the person that had said that was part of a sect that is very, very reviled in Israel, Neturei Karta, I believe. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. And there was a lot of emails saying that this person doesn't represent us, and therefore you must take it down. Whereas in my policy for the past 15 years has been, every time I post somebody of any identity group that is saying something that doesn't cohere with the main ideology of the identity group, there's always lots of emails saying, this person does not represent us, therefore you must take them down. And so even though this was probably the most uncomfortable example of that, like I said, 40,000 comments, thousands of emails, texts to my personal cell phone number, I left it up, and it was very uncomfortable for a few days. I think it damaged some of the relationships in my life. And I went on for the next few weeks feeling like, I'd paid my pound of flesh, and, I I'd platformed somebody very full-throatedly speaking out about what was happening in Palestine. And I was coming up on, as you mentioned, Dear New York, and something just felt very dissonant and strange to me about being about to promote this work and this event that was celebratory in tone without engaging very deeply with what's going on in Palestine right now. And I had gotten an email right after I posted that previous one a few months ago. 98% of them were negative, but I want to be clear about that. 98% of them were disapproving. Most, I would say, of those 98% were politely expressed, but the one of the emails that came in that was supportive was from a doctor who had just returned from Doctors Without Borders, and she offered to meet. And her name was Aksa. And she started explaining her experience, and I photographed her and started interviewing her. And then one thing she said, which I'm so glad she said, was that I feel very uncomfortable giving this interview because so much of the advocacy right now is on behalf of Palestinians as opposed to from Palestinians themselves. And I would really wish to center my Palestinian colleagues. And she said, well, maybe one day you can do that. And I said, well, let's talk about that. And that was the impetus to start making, these connections. And what I do is I do the interviews on Zoom. And then I have she was the field communications director for MSF, which is Doctors Without Border, but I just call her my co-creator now because she worked so hard. She went so above and beyond. Noor Al-Saka is her name. She went so above and beyond the call of duty. And so, yeah, we've done about 10 or 12 stories now. And yeah, all of this to say it did feel like something that I had to do and that I would be very unhappy with myself if I hadn't done before I entered into this season of promoting work that ultimately I'm the creator of and promoting something that is celebratory in nature. I wanted to look directly and full-throatedly at the horrors that are going on right now.
And I think it also speaks to, almost like the death of dialogue, that we can't have conversations in this, in the day and age without everyone like demonizing the other person, where it's like, just because you don't want innocent children to die doesn't mean you are pro-Hamas. In fact, as an Iranian, I have a special animosity towards fanaticism of any flavor, right? Especially what, those terrorist groups, when they took over the country of Iran, for example, and they're funding all this awful stuff. At the same time, to see the innocence and the beauty of, the everyday person. And I think how some people just shut their heart off to it. It's like, oh, I had one prominent Iranian, figure tell me, oh, well, they're just paying for the sins of their fathers. Like, matter of fact. And it's like, when we get to the point where, that level of death, we can just turn a blind eye on it, then we've really lost our way. So, and I think in painting anyone, right? Like, one thing I like about Humans of New York is like every person is truly unique. And that's also an overused word, but within the state of Israel, there's many different viewpoints. Within Palestine, it's not all one, black and white.
I think the main problem that both Israel and the United States have in common right now is that the humanists in the society have lost access to the halls of power, and in some way due to electoral defeat, but in other ways due to institutional rigging and institutional deconstruction, so that the people in power can become entrenched there and have a free hand. And it's what's happened in both of our societies right now. And you know what? It's what's happened in Palestine too. It's, it's like Hamas. I mean, what they did on October 7th was disgusting. And, that the problem is that was put onto all Palestinian people and continues to be put on all Palestinian people. And so, I think if there's one thing that all three of our countries have in common right now is that there's a great mass of humanistic people in each population that have lost access to the halls of power, yet are being held accountable, blamed, and punished for everything that happens in those halls of power.
That to me is a excellent depiction, and I also feels very relevant to Iran, where the vast majority of people there, I would say, want a humanist, society based on shared humanity and not what those in the halls of power. I also think like those who are humanists tend to seek the halls of power much less and much less strongly. Yeah. So, I mean, I do want to ask you too, I've personally felt the impact of a story being told, and I know each one of these stories that you tell shape you. For those who don't know, you did a piece that was 52 posts, 20,000 words or so on my grandfather. And it was to this day 8 or 9 of the most meaningful months of my life where I got the chance to go pick you up and we brainstorm on the way over and interpret while you were interviewing my grandfather. And in what way did it shape or have an impact on you?
I think, probably more than the story having impacted my life, it was just your grandfather himself. I think your grandfather and his example and his influence definitely it sank pretty deep into me, and that's why I said it's like if you were to say if your grandfather is in anything, it's not Dear New York, it's the Palestine series, it's the responsibility that we have to speak about things that we see that are unjust. It's not enough to just recognize them. It's not enough just to not partake in them. If you are to live your values and live your truth, it requires speaking about things, and it that quietly are unjust. And so I think if there is a impact that your grandfather has had on me, it's constantly reminding me of the importance of speaking your beliefs and living your beliefs, not just thinking your beliefs. It's it's thoughts, words, and actions that represent a belief system. If that plays into my work at all, it would be the moments that that require taking a risk for the purpose of speaking about things that you quietly and privately view as unjust, because that is the requirements of a truly lived and truly felt belief system.
And as we wrap up, your belief system, which seems to be on the preciousness of every person and the wisdom and the story and the depth right beneath the surface of every single human life, that's going to be on full display in Grand Central for 2 weeks. Why does it matter for us to speak, live, act these beliefs in the sense of, I guess, what is the action that the everyday person could take? Like how do they play a role in seeing a better story? How is it by them speaking up, or them writing something or photographing something? How is that actually going to lead to true change? Like, how do you go from art that, wow, it awakens, it makes us question, to a true movement? Like, and I ask this because you're not, outside of being an artist, you've also studied political science, history. It's one of your passions, and how movements occur and how like leaders arise. Like, what does it take for people to feel agency that, hey, yes, these halls of power may have been taken from humanists, but they can also be taken back? Like, what is it that you think can ignite that level of belief and hope through the stories we tell?
Well, I mean, first of all, just as a rule, I generally try to prescribe and control my own behavior much more than prescribe behavior for other people. So I can, speak to what works for me. And that is trying to act correctly and control the decisions in the time that is immediately in front of me. and not control, not worry or obsess over the things that are out of my control. So I try to, live my beliefs and be of service to others in the ways that are in front of my face. And then what you do is you start in these small ways, and then you start pulling on these string, and you start down this path, and then it puts you in positions often to make greater and greater amounts of change just by starting to serve somebody nearby you or serve somebody in front of your face. I think always of Martin Luther King. It just started with Montgomery bus boycott. He wasn't trying to, become the face of civil rights, both at that time and in history. He was trying to change the rules of the bus system in Montgomery, and he did it reluctantly. I remember the first, I think it's Garrow's biography of him. The first line is King hesitated, and it was him standing in the back of a meeting, a community meeting for the Montgomery bus boycott, and them like calling him to the front to give a speech. He didn't even want to do it. That's an example of somebody taking the problem that's right in front of their face and trying to solve that, and that the winds and God and the universe recognizing that action and that spirit of service, and then ramping him up with more and more responsibility as other people recognized it too. And so I think, all the biggest and all the most beautiful things in life don't come from plotting this grand scheme. It comes from doing what's possible for you, stepping up and taking that risk, and then just following that road. And so it's just like, start with the day, start with this 24 hours that's in front of you. What can you do in this 24 hours to be of service, to help people, to become a better person, to become more healthy? Just win your day. And your only job is to wake up every single day and keep stepping forward. Try to make yourself a better person and try to make your work better every single day. And then see what happens when the snowball gets to the bottom of the hill.
That reminds me of one of my favorite characters in all of literature. My second favorite artist named Brandon is Brandon Sanderson. And in The Way of Kings, he wrote Dalinar, the Blackthorn, says, what is the most important step a person can take? The next step,
And the Sanderson love is something we both share. So also an admirer, and that was a love passed down to me from you in the form of a 900-page book.
You're like, Rustam, I can't read all these books. Like, stop sending me.
that actually kickstarted my most recent season of reading, I believe. I had gotten so busy with Humans of New York, my reading habit had kind of fallen to the wayside. And then I think that 900-page book you gave me was like the first of like 400 books I read in like the last 3 or 4 years. So yeah, I thank you for that.
Well, thank you for your time today. And Journey Before Destination, I can't wait to see you in New York. I'll be there for the opening of the event. And as always, I love speaking with you. To me, you're the epitome of what an artist is all about, and what your work has done has personally had a huge impact on my life. So thank you.
Thank you, Rustam.